Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. 2 tickets, s'il vous plaît. Anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast.
Okay, chapter 11. There's lots to say here, so make sure you've got your pencils sharpened, and we'll push on with this one. First thing to say, just straight into chapter 11, is there's that time marker in the first sentence, the 6 weeks before. As it turned out, I did not break my contract, for it was 6 weeks before the auberge de Johann Cottard even showed signs of opening. So there's that sense of time passing here, with the fact that it takes 6 weeks before the thing opens. Sorry, excuse me. Bless me. So that sense of time passing there is important, and you can see why he's decided to carve the chapters up in this way. Okay, so off we go, and then I'll stop it quite frequently on this one to fill in some bits and pieces.
As it turned out, I did not break my contract, for it was 6 weeks before the auberge de Johann Cottard even showed signs of opening. In the meantime, I worked at the Hotel X 4 days a week in the cafeterie, one day helping the waiter on the 4th floor, and one day replacing the woman who washed up for the dining room. My day off, luckily, was Sunday, but sometimes another man was ill and I had to work that day as well. The hours were from 7 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and from 5 in the evening till 9, 11 hours. But it was a 14-hour day when I washed up for the dining room. By the ordinary standards of a Paris plongeur, these are exceptionally short hours.
So here, I mean, this seems hyperbolic, because they're clearly not short hours. And yet the reality is that for a plongeur, they are short hours. So the sort of litotes happening here, again, it's not perfect in the same way that we rarely find perfect examples of any of these techniques, but it functions as litotes because they're short hours, but of course what that means is something else, that they're not really short hours by anybody else's standards, but by a plongeur's standards they are. So you could say it's hyperbole, although it's not really, is it? Because it's hard to say. For a plongeur, they're not short hours. I think rather than hyperbole, I'd be tempted to say it's litotes, because it's underplaying the reality of something.
The only hardship of the life was the fearful heat and stuffiness of those labyrinthine cellars.
So those labyrinthine cellars, again, which is a reference back to the previous chapter, that sort of purgatory sense of description that's given to the kitchens and the cellars and the cafeteria. I don't know, the cafetiere. No, that's how you make a coffee, isn't it? It's essentially the pantry of a big restaurant. Anyway, he calls it's a still room in English, but a still room in a hotel or a restaurant is where they have the food stores. Very small rooms usually. That phrase heat and stuffiness is hendiadys as well. I think I'd pair those together. Being the hardship of life was the fearful heat and stuffiness of these labyrinthine cellars. So the hendiadys to emphasise just how unpleasant the working conditions actually are.
Apart from this, the hotel, which was large and well organised, was considered a comfortable one. Our cafeterie was a murky cellar, measuring 20 feet by 7 by 8 high, and so crowded with coffee urns, bread cutters and the like, that one could hardly move without banging against something. It was lighted by one dim electric bulb and 4 or 5 gas fires that sent out a fierce red breath.
So just to tie in with that hellish purgatory description that does remind us of Dante's Seventh Circle, there's personification here of the fierce red breath of the fires. So again, more sense of it being frightening, intimidating and hellish. So do pick these out if you can, and perhaps add them to a list of description, because it's a really useful section, I think, is this to describe the conditions he works in. We get more descriptions later of the people he's working with, but this is probably the best set of descriptions here to describe the actual rooms in which he's working.
There was a thermometer there, and the temperature never fell below 110 degrees Fahrenheit. It neared 130 at some times of the day. At one end were 5 service lifts, and at the other an ice cupboard where we stored milk and butter. When you went into the ice cupboard, you dropped 100 degrees of temperature at a single step. It used to remind me of the hymn about Greenland's icy mountains and India's coral strand. 2 men worked in the cafeteria besides Boris and myself. One was Mario, a huge, excitable Italian. He was like a city policeman with operatic gestures. And the other, a hairy, uncouth animal whom we called the Magyar.
Okay, so more zoomorphism there. Lost it again. The hairy, uncouth animal. So there's a more zoomorphic description there, whom we called the Magyar. Now, the Magyar is a slang term for someone who's Hungarian or from Hungary. So he gets nicknamed the Magyar.
I think he was a Transylvanian or something even more remote. Except the Magyar, we were all big men, and at the rush hours we collided incessantly. The work in the cafeteria was spasmodic. We were never idle, but the real work only came in bursts of 2 hours at a time. We called each burst un coup de feu.
Now, you'll probably know what that means, given your French experience and background. I had to look this up, but it means gunshot, which is understandable because it's the burst of intense work.
The first coup de feu came at 8, when the guests upstairs began to wake up and demand breakfast. At 8, a sudden banging and yelling would break out all through the basement. Bells rang on all sides. Blue-aproned men rushed through the passages. Our service lifts came down with a simultaneous crash, and the waiters on all 5 floors began shouting Italian oaths down the shafts.
That asyndetic list there, just to re-emphasise, I must stop saying re-emphasise, just to really push that sense of chaos that's happening in there, and when the burst happens, the banging and the yelling. In fact, that's hendiadys there. At 8, a sudden banging and yelling. I would bracket those as hendiadys, and bells ringing, and all the chaos and things that ensue.
I don't remember all our duties, but they included making tea, coffee and chocolate, fetching meals from the kitchen, wines from the cellar, and fruit and so forth from the dining room.
So more lists here, more asyndetic lists to I almost said re-emphasise, to show, demonstrate how many jobs he had to do and the range of jobs he had to do.
Slicing bread, making toast, rolling pats of butter, measuring jam, opening milk cans, counting lumps of sugar, boiling eggs, cooking porridge, pounding ice, grinding coffee.
Look at all the verbs here. Everything's preloaded with a verb: opening, counting, boiling, cooking, pounding, grinding, and all the other ones as well. But that's just the last few. All those dynamic verbs. They're all active verbs to show how active he himself is.
All this for from 100 to 200 customers. The kitchen was 30 yards away, and the dining room 60 or 70 yards. Everything we sent up in the service lifts had to be covered by a voucher, and the vouchers had to be carefully filed, and there was trouble if even a lump of sugar was lost.
Now, there's a little bit of sort of anadiplosis there in the use of that voucher. I know technically it's not 2 separate sentences, but it does pick up for where the last one left. So had to be covered by a voucher, and the vouchers had to be carefully filed. So what that does, and normally I wouldn't pick up on it just for the sake of it. I mean, you know me. But here I think it does actually have a purpose, and it's the fact that it's so time-consuming and fastidious and pedantic that the anadiplosis there, by repeating the word vouchers, it shows just how sort of bureaucratic and procedural the work is. And you could compare that to the way in which the Stasi had similar work practice and methods in Funder's text, but worth thinking about there. I think the reason he's used that is to show us how pedantic the work is, in spite of the chaos.
Besides this, we had to supply the staff with bread and coffee and fetch the meals for the waiters upstairs.
What's happening now? Hang on, bear with me. Can't seem to stop it.
And fetch the meals for the waiters upstairs. All in all, it was a complicated job. I calculated that one had to walk and run about 15 miles during the day, and yet the strain of the work was more mental than physical. Nothing could be easier on the face of it than this stupid scullion work, but it is astonishingly hard when one is in a hurry. One has to leap to and fro between a multitude of jobs. It is like sorting a pack of cards against the clock. You are, for example, making toast when bang, down comes a service lift with an order for tea, rolls and 3 different kinds of jam, and simultaneously bang, down comes another, demanding scrambled eggs, coffee and grapefruit.
So there's a slight shift in address here. We shift to the second person, this direct address. You are, for example, making toast when bang, down comes a service lift. So by directly addressing the reader and putting it into the second person, he's immersing us in the experience. He's making us feel like we're having to do the work, and suddenly it becomes much more immediate and real because we can now empathise with the conditions he has to work with and the sort of impossibility of working so quickly and in such different ways. There's onomatopoeia, of course, with bang, with the exclamation mark. They're both exclamatory phrases there, but they're also onomatopoeic because bang apparently is onomatopoeia. I'm not quite sure how it is really, but it's accepted as being an onomatopoeic word. Shall I spell it? I-T. No, that's a bad joke. I'll try. O-N-O-M-A-T-O-P-O-E-I-A, I think. So the onomatopoeia, and the purpose of onomatopoeia, I think, is to immerse the reader in this frenetic chaos that he's in. So we've got the direct address, the second person, and we've also got the onomatopoeia to immerse the reader in the world that he finds himself in.
You run to the kitchen for the eggs and to the dining room for the fruit, going like lightning so as to be back before your toast burns.
Oh, I missed the simile there as well. There's one earlier on about stacking sorting a pack of cards against the clock is a simile there, and similarly another simile, going like lightning so as to be back before your toast burns. Lightning and burns there again. Just the whole thing is drawing on that semantic field of chaos and speed and this frenetic energy that he has to have in order to complete the work. It does sound mad, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked in the catering industry. I haven't, but this really puts me off. It puts me off going to a restaurant ever again, I think.
And having to remember about the tea and coffee, besides half a dozen other orders that are still pending. And at the same time, some waiter is following you and making trouble about a lost bottle of soda water, and you are arguing with him. It needs more brains than one might think. Mario said, no doubt truly, that it took a year to make a reliable cafetier. The time between 8 and 10:30 was a sort of delirium. Sometimes we were going as though we had only 5 minutes to live. Sometimes there were sudden lulls, when the orders stopped and everything seemed quiet for a moment.
So here we have that parallelism of the anaphora of starting with sometimes, but it gives that parallel structure. Sometimes we were going as though we had only 5 minutes to live. Sometimes there were sudden lulls when the orders stopped and everything seemed quiet for a moment. And it just shows the range and the sort of unpredictability, I suppose, of the job and how different it could be. It's sort of feast and famine, isn't it? It goes from being extreme to being very quiet.
Then we swept up the litter from the floor, threw down fresh sawdust, and swallowed gallipots of wine or coffee or water, anything, so long as it was wet. Very often we used to break off chunks of ice and suck them while we worked. The heat among the gas fires was nauseating. We swallowed quarts of drink during the day, and after a few hours even our aprons were drenched with sweat.
More bodily fluids there. You're very welcome.
At times we were hopelessly behind with the work, and some of the customers would have gone without their breakfast, but Mario always pulled us through. He had worked 14 years in the cafeteria, and he had the skill that never wastes a second between jobs.
There's an admiration here for Mario, and we presume as hyperbole here of never wasting a second between jobs. It seems hyperbolic, doesn't it? But it shows the admiration that Orwell has for him and the way in which he works with such efficiency.
The Magyar was very stupid, and I was inexperienced, and Boris was inclined to shirk, partly because of his lame leg, partly because he was ashamed of working in the cafeteria after being a waiter. But Mario was wonderful.
So that anaphoric parallelism there of partly because of his lame leg, partly because he was ashamed of working in the cafeteria. No, cafeteria. Cafeteria? I can't seem to remember how to pronounce that one. Cafeteria, I think. So, and I suppose there's the sort of bathos there. The first reason is that he's got a bad leg, which is fair enough. The second is more to do with his pride, because he feels ashamed of having to work in such a low base position after being a waiter. So it sort of doesn't show Boris in a particularly good light there either. It's bathos. But then it climaxes with Mario. Mario is wonderful, and that quite strong adjective. It shows admiration for Mario.
The way he would stretch his great arms right across the cafeteria to fill a coffee pot with one hand and boil an egg with the other, at the same time watching toast and shouting directions to the Magyar, and between whiles singing snatches from Rigoletto, was beyond all praise.
So a very superlative description of Mario there, beyond all praise. So you know his behaviour couldn't be praised highly enough. It's superlative. Quite a rare moment of real unadulterated praise for someone, which we don't often find in Funda or in this one. So it's a useful description to have.
The patron knew his value, and he was paid 1,000 francs a month instead of 500 like the rest of us. The breakfast pandemonium stopped at 10:30. Then we scrubbed the cafeteria tables, swept the floor and polished the brasswork, and on good mornings went one at a time to the lavatory for a smoke. This was our slack time. Only relatively slack, however, for we had only 10 minutes for lunch, and we never got through it uninterrupted. The customers' luncheon hour between 12 and 2 was another period of turmoil like the breakfast hour. Most of our work was fetching meals from the kitchen, which meant constant engueulade from the cooks. By this time the cooks had sweated in front of their furnaces for 4 or 5 hours, and their tempers were all warmed up.
More semantic field or lexical field of heat here. We can link back to the references to the fires and the sweat and the temperature from earlier on in this chapter and before this chapter as well. But the metaphor here that even the cooks' tempers are all warmed up, just like the actual environment they work in. Their tempers are warmed up, which means that of course they're angry and they're ready to pick a fight. So there's sort of a pugnacious description of these cooks because of the heat. So he wraps this all together in this quite poetic description, really, of using the semantic field of heat, both in a physical, real sense, but also in that emotional temperament sense, rather than temperature, but temperament as well. So an interesting use of wordplay there, and certainly quite novelistic and a feature of fiction writing, not unsimilar to something Funda's done in the past with her writing style, where she blended that style of fiction with fact and travel writing.
At 2, we were suddenly free men. We threw off our aprons and put on our coats, hurried out of doors, and when we had money, dived into the nearest bistro. It was strange, coming up into the street from those firelit cellars. The air seemed blindingly clear and cold, like Arctic summer, and how sweet the petrol did smell after the stenches of sweat and food. Sometimes we met some of our cooks and waiters in the bistros, and they were friendly and stood us drinks. Indoors we were their slaves, but it is an etiquette in hotel life that between hours everyone is equal, and the engueulades do not count. At 4:45 we went back to the hotel.
Another time marker here gives us that sense of progression, but also that sense of realism as well. Very accurate, and this shows or suggests that Orwell has been very, very fastidious in his record keeping to be able to know that exactly at 4:45 they went back to the hotel. So we might question his authenticity. In fact, is he just guessing at these numbers? But perhaps we have to believe that he has kept such accurate records.
Till 6:30 there were no orders, and we used this time to polish silver, clean out the coffee urns, and do other odd jobs. Then the grand turmoil of the day started, the dinner hour. I wish I could be Zola for a little while, just to describe that dinner hour. The essence of the situation was that 100 or 200 people were demanding individually different meals of 5 or 6 courses, and that 50 or 60 people had to cook and serve them, and clean up the mess afterwards. Anyone with experience of catering will know what that means. And at this time...
Just pause that for a second. Zola's a reference to Émile Zola, a French novelist, who he's obviously admiring, but I suppose who he is someone who is so connected with Parisian life that he feels that he's lacking the sort of qualifications or the right to be able to describe the Parisian conditions in quite the way that someone who is a native to that place would be. So Zola is a reference to the writer Émile Zola.
The work was doubled, the whole staff were tired out, and a number of them were drunk. I could write pages about the scene without giving a true idea of it. The chargings to and fro in the narrow passages, the collisions, the yells, the struggling with crates and trays and blocks of ice, the heat, the darkness, the furious festering quarrels which there was no time to fight out, they passed description. Anyone coming into the basement for the first time would have thought himself in a den of maniacs. It was only later, when I understood the working of the hotel, that I saw order in all this chaos.
So a couple of things to say there. You've obviously got the list, the asyndetic list of all the chaos that happens, and we've had that before in this chapter and earlier about the conditions in these hotels. And just at the end of that paragraph as well, you've got the antithesis of order and chaos juxtaposed against each other, and he within this chaos, and most of us, any of us, would think this is chaos, and as he says, any of us would think we've been launched into a den of maniacs. It sounds like that's the case. It does sound like hell on earth. I can't think of anything worse, really. But later he realizes there is order in the chaos, so there's a juxtaposition there and an antithesis of those two words, order and chaos, which is worth having as well. So antithesis, Antithesiis. And that's a technique we see a lot, is antithesis in this text. And then I was going to mention something else. What was I going to say? This is quite a self-aware part of the text. When he wishes he could be Zola for a little while, there's a recognition of the fact that he is writing this. It's very self-aware of its own production, and he's very aware of his own limitations. He then also says, I could write pages about the scene without giving a true idea of it. So we're reminded of the writer's process. So it's quite meta in that way. It's aware of its own process and aware of its own limitations, and aware of the fact that you could write for pages and still not capture the real essence of it. Although he seems to do a good job, I think. So perhaps there's a little bit of sort of humility there, but perhaps he is capturing it quite well, I think, using those syndetic lists.
At 8:30, the work stopped very suddenly. We were not free till 9, but we used to throw ourselves full length on the floor and lie there resting our legs, too lazy even to go to the ice cupboard for a drink. Sometimes the chef de personnel would come in with bottles of beer, for the hotel stood us extra beer when we had had a hard day. The food we were given was no more than eatable, but the patron was not mean about drink. He allowed us 2 litres of wine a day each, knowing that if a plongeur is not given 2 litres, he will steal 3. We had the heel taps of bottles as well, so that we often drank too much, a good thing, for one seemed to work faster when partially drunk. 4 days of the week passed like this. Of the other 2 working days, one was better and one worse. After a week of this life, I felt in need of a holiday. It was Saturday night, so the people in our bistro were busy getting drunk, and with a free day ahead of me, I was ready to join them. We all went to bed drunk at 2 a.m, meaning to sleep till noon. At 5:30 I was suddenly awakened. A night watchman, sent from the hotel, was standing at my bedside. He stripped the clothes back and shook me roughly. "Get up," he said. "Tu t'es bien saoulé la gueule, pas vrai? Well, never mind that. The hotel's a man short. You got to work today." "Why should I work?" I protested. "This is my day off." "Day off, nothing. The work's got to be done. Get up." I got up and went out, feeling as though my back were broken and my skull filled with hot cinders. I did not think that I could possibly do a day's work, and yet, after only an hour in the basement, I found that I was perfectly well. It seemed that in the heat of those cellars, as in a Turkish bath, one could sweat out almost any quantity of drink. Plongeurs know this and count on it. The power of swallowing quarts of wine and then sweating it out before it can do much damage is one of the compensations of their life.
Just to end up there with more bodily fluids, more sweat in those hot conditions of the cafeteria. And that's it for chapter 11, isn't it? Not much else to say on that one. And then we're into chapter 12 next time, so I'll see you then.